Test.
We'll reconvene. The officer. Somebody could just invite the checkers to stand at the entrance here so that they can see if their numbers are called. You have to be present to win, folks. We have a series of thank you gifts for attending town meeting. The first is breakfast for two from Burke's Restaurant in the town center. The state officials have advised us that board members and department heads are ineligible to receive goodies at town meeting, but regular voters and workers and staff are welcome to. The first number is Dave, could you just ask the checkers, Dave, could you just ask the checkers to come in to see if their numbers are called, the folks out in the hall? The winning ticket is 492-266. 492-266. Breakfast for two at Burke's Restaurant. Come on down if you're a winner. We have a winner. Mr. Walden, if you can do the honors. Thank you. The next gift is...
It's the honor system. I have no idea what we're doing.
That's true. The next gift is from the Village Green Nurseries, a $25 gift certificate from Village Green Nurseries in Norfolk. And the winner is 492-242. 492-242. We have a winner, Mr. Smith. There you go. Next is a $20 gift certificate from Zebras in Medfield. $20 gift certificate from Zebras donated by the Norfolk Community League. The number is 492-230. 492-230. So are the checkers out there? Are the checkers? 492. Here we are. Thank you. The next is a one free cake. Sweets by Stacy. You get a free cake. Sweets by Stacy. In any shape. And the number is 492-263. 492-263. Greg, could you ask the checkers if they have 492-263? 492-263 out in the hallway? 263. 263. No winners, huh? Sorry? No response. Okay. You can't win if you're not at town meeting. 492-252. Thank you. Come forward. 492-252. Thank you, Mr. Bonney. Thank you for coming to town meeting.
It was all worth it. It was all worth it.
I knew I had to come in today.
Thank you. The next is a donation from the Nelson family. It's a book entitled Real Democracy, the New England Town Meeting and How It Works. It was not written by Mark Nelson, just donated by Mark Nelson. The winner is 492-279. 492-279.
Where's Jerry? Jerry Sinod?
492-279. Okay, we're going on to 492-268. 492-268 for Real Democracy. Nobody wants it. 492-280. 492. We have a winner. Hey. Mr. Nolan. There you go, Mark. Thank you. The next is a special stock. You're not allowed to drink this, by the way, in the school property, but you can possess it if you're 21 or older. It's a special blend of a wine, a Shiraz, especially vinted for town meeting. It's called Barrel of Monkeys, and it is 492-248. 492-248. Do we have a 21-year-old or older winner? We do. Mark? The second to last is another special town meeting vented wine. It's called Hope Wine. 492-2... We should hold this for the June meeting. 492-239. 492-239. Anybody 21 or older not allowed to drink this on town property, of course. 492-239. Nobody? The next is 492-254 for Hope Wine. 492-254. 492-254. We're running out of non-board, department. 492-267. 492-267. We have a winner in the back. And the last is 2 tickets donated by Barry Zimmerman of Bullfinch Financial. 2 tickets in the grandstand, September 8th, Red Sox versus the Orioles. The winner is 492-289. 492-289.
No way.
Mr. Advani, how many tickets did you get? Come on forward. It's good not to be in a board, Mr. Advani. Come on forward.
Baseball.
It's not cricket. He got his wife's ticket. It's his wife's ticket. That's Rita's ticket, I presume. Thank you very much. We'll now proceed with the business of town meeting. Thank you all for coming to town meeting. It's very important that you participate. Those recognitions, really a thank you from the community to all of you for coming here today. The next article is Article 63, 62. No, I have Pondville Cemetery. It was already done. 63. Ms. Curl, Article 63, Advisory Board.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 63 as written in the warrant.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Curl. Motion made and seconded. If you could please give us the recommendation of the Advisory Board.
This article allocates CPC fund revenues in the amount of $53,900 to rehabilitate the stone wall and sign at the Norfolk Cemetery located on Main Street.
Thank you. Any further discussion or debate with respect to Article 63? Article 63 requires a majority vote. Sorry, thank you. Ms. Pine.
Yes, I have a few pictures to show of the cemetery and the work that was proposed. This was proposed by the DPW, and it was unanimously supported by CPC. Its historic preservation funds are going to be used in this project. What is needed to be done the most is the wall needs to be moved back from the intersection because it's sticking out too far and it's a hazard. There's an opening in the wall a little farther down Seekonk Street from where this picture shows that's going to be widened so that larger vehicles can get in and out. It's now about this wide and it'll take a pony cart. We're also going to provide a sign, a new sign, down at the corner as the present sign is disintegrated. Can you show the next picture? And that shows where the new part of the cemetery is, and we're going to have a bollard and chain barrier along the road that will be appropriate for a historic cemetery. All the work is going to be supervised and conducted by the DPW. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Pine. Article 63, any further discussion for, against, or any questions regarding Article 63? Article 63 is to appropriate money, allocate money for the stone wall rehabilitation as indicated in the body of the warrant. If you vote yes, you're voting in favor of spending the money as indicated. If you vote no, you're voting not to do that. Requires a majority vote. All in favor of Article 63 say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a unanimous vote. Article 64, Ms. Curl, Advisory Board.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 64 as written in the warrant.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Curl. With the advisory board recommendation?
This article allocates CPC fund revenues in the amount of $12,000 to prepare the National Register applications for 2 historic sites to be completed by contracted professional services. The historic sites are the Norfolk Cemetery, located on Main Street, and the Pondville Cemetery, located on Everett Street.
Thank you, Ms. Curl. Any further discussion, debate in support of or against Article 64? Any questions on Article 64? It requires a majority vote. Ms. Pine at the green microphone.
I also have a couple of pictures. These 2 National Register districts have already been approved by the Massachusetts Historical Commission as an outcome and as a result of the architectural survey that was conducted by a professional historic preservation consultant in 2005. The house on the left is part of a very small extension of the historic district from the Seekonk Street Cemetery to include 4 or 5 houses along Seekonk Street, and this little district is called Sullivan's Corner. You may have seen some stories in the newspaper about it. It's a historic area around the turn of the century. And then the picture on the right is the very appealing sign, if you look very closely, that says Pondville Cemetery. This is one of the last remaining historic areas in Pondville that is recording all of the history of the area. So we at the Historical Commission, this article was proposed by the Historical Commission. We think this is the appropriate way to preserve and protect our historic districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pine. Article 64. Any further discussion for or against Article 64? Article 64 requires a majority vote. All in favor of Article 64, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a unanimous vote. We'll have 65 first, then 11 by prior vote, I believe. Is that the Article 65? Ms. Curl?
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 65 as written in the warrant.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Curl. With the advisory board recommendation.
This article allocates CPC fund revenues in the amount of $30,000 to contract professional services to complete a feasibility study for the recreational uses of approximately 150 acres of land located at the Old Town Dump.
Thank you. Any further discussion or debate with respect to Article 65? At the from the CPC, is there thank you. Presentation from the CPC. We'll have the presentation
Thank
first.
you, Mr. Moderator. Paul Theriot, Norfolk, CPC. The purpose of this study is to identify the potential passive and active recreation uses on approximately 200 acres bordered by Medway Street, Myrtle Street, Holbrook Street, and it includes the former landfill and DPW sites on Medway Branch Road. Next slide. As you can see, this is an aerial map. The area that's affected is, I don't have a pointer, but if you see that, that's the landfill site area there. That's Overlea Road. Those are the power lines. That's the river's edge. That's Midway Branch Road there. And the area is affected in this general area here. Next slide. So the possible uses that we talked about in the committee are dog park, hiking trails, life exercise, adult obstacle course, cross-country bicycling course, network of trails for hiking, biking, and cross-country skiing in the winter, winter sledding and ice skating in the immediate site of the landfill area, and general purpose playing field, which was to be primarily set aside for adult use, non-organized sports activities. Next slide. This just gives you a topographical idea as to what the property looks like. This is, again, the current landfill area. These areas up here represent wetlands, but there's a fair amount of high property, dry property in there. And again, this is the town well site down by Midway Street. Next slide. So what the study will provide and include is a base plan, a phased breakdown, phased projected cost, timelines, written assessment of possible land uses, vision schematics and graphics, site reconnaissance, opportunities, and constraints. Based on the study and consultation by DPW, Conservation, and Recreation Commissions, the specific project plans and spending recommendations will be brought to a future town meeting. Just to give you a little bit of backstory on this, this project was conceived within the CPC in the January-February timeframe. Initial project was visualized to include just the landfill site and the immediately surrounding area. After we consulted with the Recreation and DPW, the size and the scope of the study grew. So we projected, project fits what the CPC charter stands for and passes all the authorized uses. There's no impact on current budgets or expenditures outside of the CPC budgets. The CPC, Recreation, and DPW are all in favor of the study. Study will definitively outline usable areas and offer suggestions for recreation purposes. Voters will have the final say on moving forward with any proposed projects, which would be announced at a later date. And the study would be complete before the end of the summer.
Thank you, Mr. Terrio. Anybody wish to speak in opposition to Article 65? Mr. Tarazi at the red microphone. Mr. Tarazi?
We're spending, CPC is spending a lot of money on these little projects. When we look at what the CPA was for in the first place, the CPA was to preserve our community, that is to buy up land in part, keep it as open space, and to preserve the character of our community as it is today or as it was before. So far, I haven't said anything about the money that the CPC has wanted to spend because it's, it's debatable. But this, we don't have to spend $30,000 on any type of a study. We don't have to spend $7,000, or another figure I was given was around $5,000 or $6,000. We don't have to spend that. The place is already being used for recreation. It's being well used. This is a large piece of property that backs up all the way to, I believe it's Christine Estates. But not to get off the point, we're already using it for recreation. Why do we want to spend $30,000 to go in and look at it and say, oh, well, let's see if we can put a dog park in there, let's see if we can put this, that, or the other thing in there. We don't need a study to do that. If we want a dog park, we can stake off an area in there and say, okay, the dog park is going to be something that will be privately funded. The town does not want to get involved with owning a dog park. But I think if we gave the land to an organization, a quarter of an acre spot to an organization, they would, just as Medway did, they would turn that into a Eagle Scout project or something themselves. Medfield, in case anyone doesn't or hasn't been there, but Medway, I'm sorry. Medway has a very fine dog park up there. Doesn't cost the town of Medway anything. The dog officer goes up and visits it. It's under her jurisdiction, but it was privately funded, and it works fine. Getting back to the point, as far as the dog park that was pointed out, we can do without spending $30,000 to decide if we can put a dog park there. If we want to put a dog park there, we own it, and of course we can put a dog park there. Vote no on $30,000. It's a pointless study altogether.
Thank you, Mr. Tarazi. Mr. Rosenberg at the question microphone.
Yeah, Mr. Terrio's presentation mentioned town land and land owned by unknown owners. And I was curious about the land by unknown owners. What can we do with that? And how would we proceed in trying to find out who the owners are? Or would we try to proceed? Basically, I'm looking for a little more explanation about the land owned by unknown owners.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Mr. Terrio, to answer a question at the green microphone.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. When we consulted with Director of DPW, Butch Vito, the question of the ownership of some properties did come up. That would all be brought out in the site study. And I just wanted to reflect on Mr. Tarazi's statement regarding the $30,000. This is money that's set aside for recreational purposes. It's part of the 10% set aside that we allocate to open space recreation. There's affordable housing. As you know, we just went through the 10% allocations. And this is a not-to-exceed amount. The numbers are still yet to come in as to what the total cost of the study will be. Any monies that are left over will be diverted back into the fund.
Thank you, Mr. Terrio. Any further discussion or debate with respect to Article 65? Mr. Rosenberg, for the second time at the question microphone.
Right. I'm not really sure that I understood the answer about the property owned by unknown owners. Mr. Terrio, was Mr. Terrio suggesting that as part of the $30,000 research would be done to determine who those owners are, that you know, deed research was part of what was going to happen, and if not, you know, is some other mechanism in place to determine who the owners are, and if it's not possible to determine the owners, what disposition would be made with that land?
Thank you. Mr. Terrio, you can answer the question. You can't speak to the merits at this point, but you can answer the question.
Sure. Again, it was brought up with the DPW director that some of the properties were unknown ownerships. That'll be, again, we'll determine that in the study, who owns those properties. Suffice it to say that most of those properties fall outside of the immediate site area that we had initially thought of for
Thank you,
recreation
Mr. Terrio.
purposes.
Does anybody wish to speak against who has not had a chance to speak against on Article 65? Mr. Tarazi, for the second time on this motion.
Just for clarification, when I was speaking before, speaking against the $30,000 expenditure, I was well aware that this would be passive recreation, but again, the point is that they're already using it. We're already using it for passive recreation. Anyone that wants to be up there going through that process is free to do so. You know, just check with the town hall. It's open property. There are trails there. It's being used. There are people there every day walking their dogs and everything else. So again, whatever the amount is, it's just something that is a needless step.
Thank you, Mr. Tarazi. Anybody wish to speak at the green microphone? Seeing no one, yes, I see. Please step forward to the green microphone. Your name and your street, please.
Ann Proto, the Recreation Director in Norfolk. This is a wonderful opportunity. It's beautiful land, and you're absolutely correct. There are people that do use this area, but there's so much possibility there for accessibility for other people in town. And one other issue that came up was a community garden, which has been brought up several times, and we need to find out if it's a viable place for such things as that, and having trails marked so people can go out with their families. And there are people that do use this land, but there are lots of people that don't know about this land and don't have a way to get to it. And we have great space in this town, but one of the things that we are lacking is accessibility and marking. So I just think it's very important, and I think that keeping this land open and available for the community and for the residents is just, it is really keeping Norfolk the way so many of us would like to.
Thank you, Ms. Proto. Anybody wish to speak at the red microphone? Yes, sir. Your name and your street, please.
Rolf Anderson, Rockwood Road. Sometimes people can get a little too civilized and too organized. I love walking in the woods. There are plenty of places around to do that, and I'm afraid this is just getting too organized. It's nice woods. Why not leave it?
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Any further discussion for or against? Yes, at the green microphone, Ms. Russell.
I am for something. When I first read this, I thought, oh no, they're trying to like develop more land and, you know, and take away the woods. And I've spent the past 3 years with a broken ankle, and I haven't been able to walk in the woods, and I may never be able to really walk in the woods again. And the thought of having some place to walk besides North Street where the cars speed too fast, and a place to go with my dogs where maybe it's enclosed and I don't have to worry about a coyote or a fisher, it sounds really good to me. I mean, I'm actually excited about what was shown to us. So.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Any further discussion at the red microphone? Any further discussion at the green microphone? Anybody else have any questions, points that they'd like to make before we wrap up and put this to a vote? Article 65 is to expend the money stated in the warrant article. Requires a majority vote. If you vote yes, you're voting to spend the money as indicated in the warrant. If you vote no, you're voting not to spend the money. All in favor of Article 65, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. It is a majority vote. I will count it at the standing request of any 7 voters. We are now going to take up Article 11 by prior vote of town meeting. Ms. Elder, Advisory Board.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 11 as written in the warrant.
Thank you. Ms. Elder, with the recommendation of the Advisory Board.
The rationale for this reduction is to provide a small measure of property tax relief and to support residents whose income has been diminished because of job loss, wage freezes, salary cuts, or sharp declines in retirement income. The lower match will save Norfolk taxpayers about $200,000 or about $70 per household. The reduction preserves Norfolk as a CPC community, but recognizes that the state match has been reduced and that the current fund balance appears adequate relative to anticipated needs. There's no question that the reduction in the surcharge percentage will cost us some matching funds from the state, and the CPC funds have enabled the town to pursue beneficial projects such as the purchase of Highland Lake, the Weaver properties, the restoration of historic buildings, and the execution of an affordable housing program. However, the CPC fund balance was $3,252,162 as of the end of the last fiscal year. Of that amount, $2,284,791 hadn't been committed to appropriated projects and is available for purchase of open land, historic preservation, and affordable housing. To put that in context, the total amount of CPC spending before operating expenses for the fiscal years 2004 to 2009 amounted to $1,583,000, or about $700,000 less than the available balance in the fund. The reduction in the property tax surcharge requires voter approval at the next scheduled town election in 2010. If approved at that time, the reduction would be effective in fiscal 2011. The surcharge percentage can be reinstated later through the same process.
Thank you, Ms. Elder. This is a proposal by the Board of Selectmen. Does the board or its representative wish to speak to Article 11? No further comments. Anybody wish to speak for or against, please line up at the green and red microphones. Mr. Hughes at the red microphone.
Kevin Hughes, speaking as a member of the Community Preservation Committee. Community Preservation Committee is...
Speak up to the mic.
I'm sorry.
It's on, just right, be close.
The Community Preservation Committee is urging a no vote for this proposal. And there's a couple of reasons why, and I want to go through a brief proposal. A couple of things that I want people to keep in mind is community preservation funds are often the only fund source that are available for certain projects that we've done. And the advisory board did allude to the amount of money that we have spent. What that doesn't include, and I just want to make sure that we point out, is there were other things, particularly some land purchases that were brought before the town meeting that were not approved, which I believe I know one in particular was $1.2 million, which would have taken up a tremendous amount of the fund had it been approved at town meeting. So I just want people to be aware of that. There are 2 points that I'd like to make relative to our position as to why we believe that this is not the right time to do this. First, the process in that if this is approved, the reduction is approved today, it will have to be voted on at a regularly scheduled election, the next one, which would be the regular town election to be held in the spring of 2010. The reduction would then not go into effect until fiscal year 2011, which the match wouldn't be paid by the state until the fall of 2012, which is 3.5 years from now. Our position at this point is, because of the timing, and I agree, the state match has changed quite a bit. We've been very fortunate to have taken in almost $2 million in basically free money from the state in the 7 years that the fund has been in existence. And we understand that that is not going to be the same going forward. But we also don't know what the fiscal environment's going to look like in the fall of 2012. And I think to put this type of a thing on the ballot next year, to look out that far in advance, has an impact, and I think we should just be aware of it. We don't know what the match is going to be at that point. Keep in mind that these funds for the match come from fees that are paid through the Registry of Deeds, and that's where the money comes from. This isn't a budget line item in the state budget that can get written out. I mean, the match can certainly change, but it's not money that would go necessarily something else. It's money that's coming from deed receipts at the registries. And we've seen with the number of refinances and purchases on the rise that those funds are coming back. So particularly 3.5 years out, there is a possibility. The next slide just shows what the impact to the fund would be. And my second point relative to this reduction is that the change would have a significant impact on the CPA fund and our ability to meet the needs that this community has come to the committee with in terms of the things that we want to do. If you look at this, and I'll just do briefly, I'm drawing a comparison between fiscal year 08 and what we've received for fiscal year 08, and then what we would perceive under current assumptions about the state match in fiscal year 11 with a 3% surcharge and 1.5%. Now, I want people to keep in mind that again, the state matches are uncertain, but I did use the same assumptions in both, so the comparison is valid. But it would impact us in terms of a difference of about $320,000 a year. So we would collect, instead of $650,000 a year, something in the range of $300,000 a year. Why is that important? We just went through some articles, and we've gone through some things in the past. We have a beautiful, beautiful schoolhouse addition on our library. We have open space at Highland Lake. We have open space that we purchased that's between Chickatawbit and over by Jane and Paul's farm. We've had some wonderful historic properties that have been preserved. We have a shade structure at the Pond Street Recreation Complex. Those are things that we've been able to do on an annual basis that do amount to some money. We allocated today, earlier, just prior to this, just over $200,000 from the fund. If we go to $300,000 only collected in an annual basis, we're going to have to choose whether we're going to fund those types of incremental annual projects, or we're going to have to put money aside to fund some of those large open space purchases that have been discussed and discussed and discussed at this meeting in the past. So if we can just go to the next slide briefly, I just wanted to make sure that people understood what the impact on different average home values would be. The way this is structured, and people often get confused when they talk about CPA, and we talk about a 3% or 1.5% surcharge. It's 3.5 or 1.5% of the tax bill, not a change in like a Proposition 2.5. The impact of 1.5% is, if I did my calculations correct, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 cents on the effective rate on the tax rate. And I think that's such a small amount.
About another minute, please.
Okay. If you look at the differences here for an assessed value of $300,000 to $600,000, you can see that this reduction is going to save between $40 and $100 a year. One other thing to keep in mind is that for people who are facing economic difficulty, there are income restrictions or income availability for people to apply for an abatement of this based on income guidelines. And those incomes are relatively robust, so it's not just a very small amount. To summarize, this will have an impact on our ability to meet the needs that have been expressed at this meeting. There is some money in the account, but there are a couple of, and I don't want to go into the specifics of them, but they've been discussed, a couple of very large, significant, strategic pieces of open space property, and this reduction in this environment may impact our ability. We may be able to do one, but we may not be able to do two. We may not be able to do three. So I just want people to make sure that they keep that in mind when they vote. It's a relatively small amount of money, and it is going to have an impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody wish to speak at the green microphone? Anybody wish to speak in favor of Article 11? Mr. Advani?
Ramesh Advani, 1 Bush Pond Road. I think we should put all of this in perspective. And Bob, if you don't mind, can you put the second slide of Mr. Hughes had up there? Because I want to make sure that we, as we talk and think, we don't think in annual terms, number one. We think broadly beyond 1 year, and we don't look at individual little pockets of taxation. Let me be very clear. When I was on the Board of Selectmen, and 2 years ago, every time I would stand up there, I would talk about fiscal discipline and what is our fiscal picture. And 2 years ago, regardless of the economic meltdown, if you recall, if you can remember that far back, we kept saying we have a real issue with the funding that we get. We do not get enough funding from the state, and we also do not have enough commercial property. And we have to fund what we do through residential taxes and property taxes. Now, you may not be able to predict what's going to happen in 2011. Bob, this wasn't one. It's that chart that showed those numbers. No, the one before this. I just want to be clear that you should fully expect, no matter who is putting the budgets together, we are going to face an override. We're going to face it, if not in 2010, we will face it in 2011. We might face it also in 2012. We should also know that if we establish a vehicle or a road repair stabilization fund, that road stabilization fund will have to be funded so we can take care of our roads. We've got to take care of our roads, we take care of our schools, take care of our ALS service before we say we want to do everything by way of what the CPA funds are asking for. So this is taking money from one bucket and being able to put it in another bucket. I know there are going to be people who are going to say don't do this, but regardless, you should know that number, for the purposes of comparison of apples to apples, that's showing that the state match difference is 100,000. In reality, we only have a 29% state match now. You shouldn't expect that we would be losing 100,000. We'd be losing a lot less. We will certainly be going down of the 220,000 coming out of all of your pockets. And I would say if you have that kind of money in 2011 or 12, let's put it towards our operating budgets that we need for this town. I would strongly suggest you vote in favor of this.
Thank you, Mr. Advani. At the red microphone, Mr. Tarazi.
First of all, I want to thank Kevin for saving me a lot of talk. He hit on all the points I was going to hit on. Now, I couldn't make too much sense out of the last speaker. We're talking CPA funds at roughly $40 a year is what you're talking about saving. I know people, I won't mention anybody in this room, but I know people that spend that much a month on just sending out for pizza. So the CPA all the way through is a very important part, as I've mentioned before, to preserving our community. And what it's really all about, all this these fiscal problems and so on, is about keeping our community intact. And regardless of what the state is or is not going to be able to match next year or the year after that, we don't want to let that overall fund fall apart. Kevin mentioned a few minutes ago that tonight we spent, I don't know, $100,000 or something, $200,000 on out of that fund. You're voting for that. Now, for heaven's sake, if you're going to vote for spending the money, then you should be voting on keeping the money in the CPA fund or the CPC fund. So please, don't get disillusioned by, if you don't put your $41 into the CPA, you'll be free to put it into a road fund. Please, don't belittle our intelligence that much.
Thank you, Mr. Tarazi. Anybody wish to speak to this at the green microphone in support of Article 11? Anybody else wish to speak against Article 11? Mr. Tallerman at the red microphone.
Yes, again, thank you, Mr. Hughes. I think you hit on a lot of the high points. Addressing a couple points that former Selectman Advani made, the fact that we removed the CPA does not mean, obviously, that this goes into the operating fund. It doesn't. So to anyone that thinks that lessening taxation here means that that money can be appropriated for other purposes under operating, that's not true. Second, one good example that I think illustrates a lot of points. There's a recent project before the Planning Board as well as before the Conservation Commission called Paddocks and Corrals, a big open space parcel. The developer bought that for $4 million. never quite came up for CPC, but the project and the property gives a good example here. The sponsor of the article, or the Ms. Elder, who read the motion, suggested, oh, it's, you know, we already got $3 million. Well, that property alone, which if anyone's been to, is a beautiful old horse farm that has historic and open space value, that money's gone in one shot. So we can't afford to think that, well, we've got enough, we're all set. There are several beautiful open space parcels throughout that town. We have to invest long term so that we know that we can get that. Now, I would be of the opinion that we should be more proactively seeking some of these properties, but the argument still remains that we cannot ignore the fact that if we don't have that war chest, we're going to be handcuffed if and when those come up. I think it's regressive, short-term thinking that we shouldn't be grasping onto in a time of a down economy. I think that's fear policy. Second, I think it's important to note that when we save open space, this goes to another point Mr. Advani made, we prevent development. Again, this is an 80-unit subdivision. There will be, at Paddocks and Crowells, there will be kids in school there. We lose money every time we put a kid in school, $5,000 to $10,000 a year per child. Second, it eats up drinking water supplies. We talked yesterday about a new well. All these things are cumulative. You can't put them in one box or the other. Keeping this a robust program at 3% saves us money over time, saves the heritage of this town, and keeps us where we are as a town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Talman. Mr. Berkner at the question microphone.
Yes, hi, Jeff Berkner, Wampanoag. Mr. Moderator, I had a question. Since it takes so long for this to be put into place, and we can't really predict what will happen in 2011 or 12, and then if we do decide that it needs to be put back, it would again take many years to get it back. Is it worthwhile considering having someone amend this to make it a 1 or 2 year reduction and then have it automatically come back?
I'm
not sure who I would ask of that.
Town council advises that that legally cannot be done. Legal reasons are not necessarily a reason to do or not do something at town meeting. We leave that for courts, but town council has recommended that not be done, that cannot properly be done. So you have that guidance, but do you have anything further to say at the microphone?
No, I just was wondering if that's a reasonable thing to do and reasonable thing to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Berkner. At the green microphone, I see no one at the red microphone. Mr. Sneed.
Pat Sneed, Frederickson Road. I also oppose this warrant article because it's, in my opinion, an example of very small short-term gains for very significant long-term losses to the town. As has been mentioned previously, some of these properties that may or may not become available over time are going to be in the $1 million plus range. This money amounts to a little over $200,000 a year, which over a 5-year period would be about $1 million, so it is a substantial amount. And that's not counting any state match. What that will be is a variable, and we don't know, but it will likely be something and will be in addition to that. I also did my own calculation of the numbers and agree it's roughly $20 for every $100,000 of home valuation, in excess of $100,000. A point that hasn't been made is that does skew this towards the higher property values and therefore towards those who are most likely less in need of a break. So somebody in a $700,000 or $800,000 house is getting a $140 tax reduction, and I'm sure they might be happy to see that, but in terms of giving people a break, that's probably not the category of people that are most in need of a break at this point, and yet the money will be heavily skewed in their direction. And I believe that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed. Anybody at the green microphone who wishes to speak in favor of Article 11? Mr. Sterling?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I think the advisory board agrees very strongly that the preservation of open space is a vital aspect of the town. And I think we would also like to observe that the reduction that is proposed here in no way inhibits the town's ability to spend money on the acquisition of open space. The town can and often has increased taxes to pay for borrowing, for example, to acquire open space. This does not restrict the town from doing that in the future. Now, you may well say we don't like to borrow. What we do is like to take a little bit out now and put it aside. That's fine. Then you should vote against this proposal. But you are not restricted at all from raising taxes or borrowing or reducing spending in some other way in order to acquire open space.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Anybody at the red microphone wishes to speak against Article 11? Mr. Lutz.
David Lutz, Pondview Road. I think the context for this, the CPC is important. When we adopted it in the early part of this decade, I appreciate the fact that the Act does cover things like historic preservation and affordable housing, but the reality is we live in a rural community. I think a lot of people who came to the polls and put this in place were worried about protecting open space. During the 90s, there were several, as Mr. Sterling did acknowledge, this town did get presented with the acquisition of several open space properties. One very critical one, the Lynn Farm, we did buy. There were others that were not bought. This was seen, I think, at the time, and that's the way I saw it, was as a bank to allow us to acquire properties when they become available. There are properties in town that have been acknowledged. Without naming names, there are a couple of good-sized properties that if they come up for sale, that will deplete the current balance and will probably cause the CPC to consider borrowing against future revenues to acquire them. If we reduce this, we will be borrowing at a higher rate because the revenues coming in will be lower. To restore it to back to 3% will be a debate that will occur in 2012, 2013. It's not going to be an easy debate at that point. We are looking at this as a bank for the future. We need to keep this in place. I would oppose reducing this to 1.5.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz. Any further discussion at the green microphone? Mr. Kaliza.
I think that one thing to keep in mind is that over time priorities change. I was in support of this when it was first brought up before the town, and I know in my own personal life my spending priorities have changed. The company I work for, its priorities have changed in terms of how it spends money. I think the state, the federal government, every organization is analyzing how to spend its money. We all have limited resources. Yes, this was a great idea when it was first established. 3% is quick math, $300,000 to $400,000 a year. I think I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, that the piggy bank has between $2 and $3 million in it. And to my way of thinking, that's a lot of money. And next year, the year after, and the year after that, we're going to be facing overrides. I'd rather have that extra money in my pocket so I can vote for an override to support the schools, to support a new school, to support a new public safety building, to keep teachers employed. I think the town's priorities have changed. The goals of the CPC are noble, but I think there are higher priorities: fixing our roads, supporting our schools. I think there are a lot more things the town should be focusing on right now, and that's why I strongly support reducing this to 1.5%. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaliza. Mr. Sneed at the red microphone for the second time on this motion.
Yeah, I forgot to make one point that I wanted to make, and that is one of the groups that's mentioned most often is needing a relief are the seniors on fixed income. Just to clarify, they are not necessarily going to be a beneficiary of this because they can exempt themselves currently. If they have done so, then of course they'll get no break. To the extent that they have not, they can go do that, so they do not need this, this article in order to achieve the break that might benefit them. And just to respond to the previous speaker, there is nothing in this that dedicates this money to anything else that benefits the town. It simply goes into our pockets.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed. Any further speakers at the green microphone? At the red microphone for the second, Mr. Tomaszewski, Board of Selectmen.
Thank you. I think the act went into place in 2001, and I remember I voted for it. I supported it then. A little bit louder, please.
Is the red light on, Jim? Just hold it right up to your mouth. There you go.
I supported this back in 2001. I was still supporting going forward. But I think right now we're extraordinary times. And I think I support the taking it back to 1.5%. I think if Jack presented it during the break there, we're losing another $300,000 from the state. I'm not sure what it's going to do next year, the year here after Commissioner's remarks, I think, right on point. You know, probably some people are going to disagree with my next statement, but I think I'm a reasonably intelligent person. And I think I am intelligent enough to know when I don't know something. And I don't think I can presume to know the financial situation of every citizen in Norfolk. So to say that today $140 or $100 or $20 is not important, I should tell them why they can't have that back. I don't agree with that. I think that's presuming to know the situation of every person in Norfolk. And I think Dave said that in a couple of years it'd be hard to get it back. Why is that? If it's only $100 or $20 or $30, why would it be so hard to get it back? It's always harder to take it away from the tax dollar than it is to put it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tomaszewski. At the red microphone for the second time on this motion, Mr. Tarazi.
Yes, to counter, you know, once again, we're talking an amount of about $41. And in all due respect to Mr. Tomaszewski, if somebody is so hard-pressed that they cannot come up with that $41 to put into the CPA fund, then they're going to be exempt. All they've got to do is file the right paperwork down at the town hall, and they will be exempt. They won't have to put that $41. They won't have to put that money in. It's kind of a empty argument, because if you're that poor, you don't have to pay it anyway. But here, going back to the point, for the small amount of money that's involved, if we're getting more bang for our buck with CPA, with the CPA, the act itself, than we can get out of anything else. And somebody else said, well, I want to put the $41 into my pocket so that I can spend it 3 or 4 years from now when my taxes go up. Give me a break. You know, you're not going to put that aside to wait for your taxes to come up. You're going to blow it on something else. So don't, but you know, at least respect our intelligence when you make statements like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tarazi. At the green microphone, Mr. Tomaszewski for the second time on this motion.
One or two other points. You talked about, you know, the value of buying up open space, and I support that. I don't want people to think, though, that it's a great idea to buy up all the open space, because we do need some development in this town, both residential and commercial. One of the reasons we're facing the financial challenges we are, besides the state's taking away from us, is that there's a line item on the revenue, and you'll see it on June 16th, called new growth. And for most of the, from about 2001 till about midway through last year, we were getting about $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in money for new growth. About it equaled the amount we were getting from top to land. So that's how large that was. If that stops, we're going to be facing overrides every year, or we're going to be facing class sizes of 25 and 30 kids in a school, or we're going to face 2 less firemen, or 2 less policemen. We do need new growth money. If you think we don't think we need another kid in another school, you're wrong. And that equation about every kid that comes to the school is going to cost $10,000. That's not true. Our enrollment at Norfolk Elementary has gone down. It's still going up in terms of cost. So.
Thank you, Mr. Tomaszewski. At the red microphone, Mr. Lutz for the second time.
I think to address the question of overrides, we probably will be faced with overrides in the next 3 or 4 years. And the reality is that if we have a piece of open space that comes before us to, as Mr. Sterling said, that we can in fact vote to bond to buy that, we're going to be faced with the choice of an operating override or a piece of open space override. And, you know, I live in this town. I know it's going to be a tough choice for everyone. We're banking this money for the future, folks. Let's bank it.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz. Any further speakers at the green microphone? Mr. Advani for the second time on this motion.
Without insulting anybody's intelligence and without complicating matters, I'd be glad to take those offline, Mr. Moderator, with some of the speakers. But I just want to be respectful of everybody here and remind you of one thing. This vote, regardless of how you individually feel about it, you are, as a town meeting, simply going to say you're expressing your view, but the final decision will be made by putting it on a ballot and letting all voters decide. So just to be fair to those of, you might have some very strong views, but why don't these people just come to town meeting and take care of things? But regardless of that, I would suggest to you, give all the voters a chance, and all the people who want to keep the taxes where they are, regardless of any individual's economic situation, which I think is very presumptuous. But keeping that aside, I think it would be great if this town meeting, the people that we have here, allow the town voters to vote on this on an election and decide, do they want those taxes to go up or down? And guess what? They might at the same time be deciding on two things, a potential override and a potential reduction. And then they can make those choices, whether it's $40 or $140. I'm just being respectful and asking you to think about this.
Thank you, Mr. Advani. Mr. Commendal at the red microphone.
Well, actually, it's a combination question.
Question. Go to the question microphone, Mr. Commendal.
At this point, I'm starting to get a little confused. I heard there was maybe 2.5 million in the fund, and then I got a little nervous that the town may reach into that to use it for other things. I just need some clarification there.
Thank you. Town Council on the clarification. You got it?
We have the on-off switch figured out with the new equipment. Money that's raised through Community Preservation Act revenues by statute, has to be placed in the Community Preservation Fund and may only be expended for those purposes.
Thank you, Council. At the red microphone, anybody? Ms. Langhauser.
Andrea Langhauser. Andrea Langhauser, Noon Hill. Couple points. I think a lot of people probably have already made up their minds, but I just want to clarify a couple points. We are the people that came out when we had plenty of other things to do and plenty of great sports to watch in order to decide what needs to be done for town meeting. And we get to decide on this article. When you decide if you want to keep it at 3% or go down to 1.5%, you have to recognize it's a triple hit. You may be saving some tax money if you go from 3% to 1.5%, but you are also reducing the amount of money that the state will provide a match for. As soon as you walk off of 3%, you are also taking this town out of the second round and the third round. Last year was the first year we didn't get 100%, and because we were in because we were a 3% community, we got an extra 20% that other communities didn't get. So that's just free money that we would walk away from. The second thing is that this year, we actually, Norfolk, good old affluent Norfolk, we actually increased our decimal rate. When we go into the second round, we will get 100% match of the money that's available in the second round. So we are the people that get to decide what's best for the town and what goes forward to the ballot. And it's a triple hit. It's not just money you save, it's money that the state will give to another community because you dropped off of 3%. The other thing is that the reason we have historically have such a large budget is twofold. One is we got involved in CPA the very first year that you could. I personally didn't believe that the town was going to be able to pass it, but everybody believed in what CPC meant. We came in early. We have been getting 100% of monies, and we weren't spending it. It's not a bad thing not to spend money, and it's not a bad thing to have money in a bank account. But those days are over. Not only is there less money available for state matches, there are 141 communities that have passed the Community Preservation Act. Just this year, in this fiscal climate, 2 more communities came on and passed the Community Preservation Act. So the money is getting passed around to more people, so we need to keep our bank solid, because land purchases really are $500,000 to $1 million at a whack, any one of them. So I just hope you keep it at 3%.
Thank you, Ms. Langhauser. Any speakers at the green microphone? Any further speakers at the red microphone? Ms. Russell.
I can see both sides, and but as I said before, I'm relatively new here. The one asset that this town has that very few other towns have is open space that will be available to be preserved. And yes, we need development. Yes, we need revenue from commercial real estate and residential real estate. Yeah. But in the meantime, the one thing that makes this town very special is the fact that there is so much virgin land. And that's a major asset, you know, so.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Any further debate on Article 11? Any further debate for or against Article 11? Article 11 proposes to reduce the CPC surcharge from 3% to 1.5%. If you vote yes, you're voting to reduce the surcharge from 3% to 1.5%. If you vote no, you're voting to keep the surcharge as it now is at 3%. Requires a majority vote. All in favor of Article 11, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. No. It is not a majority vote. I will count it at the request of any 7 voters. I see 1 voter asking 2, 3, 4. I have 7 voters who wish to have a standing count. Mr. McLean, Mr. Connors, and Mr. Smith. If you would come forward, please.
Yeah, I thought so. Want to buy some water?
Solemnly swear that you will truthfully and accurately count the vote at town meeting as directed by the moderator. Thank you. Jonathan, if you could do the front of the stage and on the stage as a far division. Dick, if you could do this side, and people will look toward you if they want you to count. Steve, do this side, and we'll look toward you if they want you to count. Thank you. If you're sitting in the middle of the hall, just face one aisle or the other, and whichever way you're facing the person will count you. No rotating allowed. If you are in favor of Article 11 to reduce the CPC surcharge from 3% to 1.5%, please stand. Mr. McLean. 4. Mr. Connors.
13.
Mr. Smith.
12.
Thank you. Be seated. Yes, Jonathan, you counted the stage. Yes, he did. Thank you. If you oppose Article 11, please stand. Mr. McLean.
17.
Mr. Connors.
14.
Mr. Smith.
19.
Thank you. Be seated.
That woke me up.
The vote is 29 in favor, 50 opposed. Article 11 is defeated. The next article on the warrant is Article 66. Ms. Elder for the Advisory Board. Mr. Hathaway.
I'd like to make a motion to consider Article 85 at this point.
Reconsider.
To consider, to move forward Article 85 to this time.
The motion has been made. Is there a second? Is there a second to move Article 85 forward? Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded to advance Article 85 to be considered as the next article in the town meeting warrant. Mr. Hathaway, in support of that motion.
I understand that there are maybe one or two presentations, but my real purpose for this is there are a number of department heads here, and this article allows residents to ask the department heads questions. Some of those department heads also have a considerable drive because they live out of town, and I'd just like the opportunity for them to answer and be on their way at a somewhat reasonable time.
Thank you. Any further discussion about whether or not to advance Article 85 for consideration at this time? Requires a majority vote. If you vote yes, you're voting to move Article 85 forward, and we'll deal with it right away. Otherwise, if you vote no, we'll deal with Article 66 as the next item on the warrant. All in favor of advancing Article 85, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. It is a majority vote. Article 85 is now before town meeting. On Article 85, Mr. Sterling, Advisory Board.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town appoint the following committees. Arts Council, 9 members. ADA Compliance Committee, 5 members, plus Town Administrator, ex officio and non-voting. Insurance Advisory Committee, 5 members. Zoning Bylaw Study Committee, 7 members appointed as follows. 2 members appointed by the Board of Selectmen and 1 member or designee, each appointed by the Planning Board, Board of Health, Conservation Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals and Building Department, and Town Council ex officio and non-voting. Corrections Advisory Committee, 3 members. Economic Development Committee, 5 members appointed jointly by the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. Open Space Committee, 5 members as follows. 1 member to be a member or designee of the Recreation Commission, 1 member to be a member or designee of the Conservation Commission, 1 member to be a member or designee of the Planning Board, and 2 others to be appointed jointly by the Planning Board and Conservation Commission. Public Safety Building Committee, 4 members appointed by the Board of Selectmen, plus the Police Chief, Fire Chief, Town Administrator, 1 member of the Board of Selectmen and the Building Commissioner, ex officio and non-voting. School Building Committee, 5 members appointed by the Board of Selectmen, plus 2 members of the School Committee, School Superintendent, Town Administrator, and Building Commissioner, ex officio and non-voting.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Sterling, anything further from the Advisory Board in support of the motion?
We encourage these committees to be appointed.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Well said. Any further discussion with respect to Article 85? Mr. Nicodemus.
I'm a little lost at the moment on one item. Article 49 may not have been heard, but it was asked to have the Economic Development Committee advance from 5 to 7 members. That isn't what was read. If this goes forward, does that mean we can't get an enlarged committee?
Mr. Nicodemus, we will separately consider the proposal to enlarge the committee at that appropriate time. We'll come back to it. It was on the consent calendar. Was it approved already? I think it was held, wasn't it? No. Hang on a second. What article was that, Mr. Nicodemus? 49? Thank you. 49 was already approved on the consent calendar. It's it conforms now with the Economic Development Committee should read 7, not 5. Mr. Sterling, you'll take that as a friendly amendment, I presume? Yeah. Thank you. It says 7 members on the Economic Development Committee, otherwise as stated by Mr. Sterling. Any further questions, comments, or debate on the pending motion to appoint these various committees of town meeting? Requires a majority vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a unanimous vote. At this point, there's also an opportunity, Mr. Hathaway, if you'd like to introduce department heads before they hit the road, or any other questions or comments of town boards or committees, this is the appropriate time to do so. Mr. Hathaway, if you could just introduce those department heads, and then we'll see if there's any questions from voters.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I know we have the school superintendent, Mr. Don LeClaire. Robert Glasser, our library director. Chief Assessor, Butch Vito, our DPW Director. We also have Marion Harrington, my Executive Assistant, Julie Shefko, our Town Accountant, Cheryl Kelly, our Treasurer Collector, Anne Marie Dugan, our Assistant Treasurer Collector, Chief Stone is there he is up in the corner, and we have Lieutenant Carroll over in the other corner protecting us.
They're actually blocking the doors. I asked them not to let anybody leave, Mr. Hathaway. Thank you all. I just asked to have an acknowledgement of our town employees and our department heads. Thank you for coming tonight. Mr. Leclerc, would you like to address town meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Hathaway, and thank you, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me to have this time, and thank you all for giving me just a few moments. I promise to take as little time as I need to, but to answer as many questions you have. And going forth, I just want to let you know, if you do have questions, this isn't anything that we're voting on or need approval on or anything tonight. Right now it's to inform the town of where we're going in regards to the new school building. So please, if at any time you would care to email me at school, call me at school, or come by and visit, that's perfectly fine with me as well. I have 3 quick slides. I want to let the town and the town's people know at this point where we are in relation to the school building project. Very brief history. In 2000, the committee was formed. Shortly thereafter, the state ran out of their money, their support money. Yeah, that's definitely a couple Snickers there. Fortunately, it's been reintroduced, and once it was, the town of Norfolk was immediately identified because of the state or condition of the Freeman Centennial School. At the last town meeting, I believe I have my dates and figures correct, the town appropriated a sum of money, half of which will be reimbursed by the state, by the MSBA, and the other half the town is responsible for, but I know at this point we've already secured some grants that will cover some of those funds. I hope you can see that okay. The Freeman Centennial School, some of the issues that we have right now are overcrowded and overused spaces. That also applies to the HOD school, the Olive Day School, which they really built just 15 years ago, in which we've had very informative debates with the MSBA not to cut it short again this time when they build. Some of the things that the town has to be very aware of, which will cost you significant money down the road if this isn't approved at the next town meeting, the outdated mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. Having just come from a district who went through that same things, we're talking millions of dollars for each one of those systems, particularly the heating and plumbing, because once you get into the heating, the debate we had with my previous town was, well, we just put in a new heating system at a couple $100,000. But the problem was, if you put in a new heating system, you're putting in new piping. If you're putting in new piping, you're either tearing up the floors or tearing out the ceilings. So it's a domino effect. The problem with the Freeman Centennial School that I became aware of when I first came on board just 10 months ago is it doesn't meet the building codes of today. There are significant issues as far as handicapped accessibility. I'm sure you're all aware of the fire suppression system, the fire alarm system, the accessibility requirements, the health and safety regulations. Space guidelines are well below what the state recommends nowadays in the educational goals of the Norfolk. Thank you. Next slide, please. Because of these concerns and because the state MSBA recommended that Norfolk be one of the communities that should go forward, Norfolk has hired professionals to study alternatives. We're looking at extensive renovation and additions or new building. We won't get into that debate now. Just you say, well, renovation and addition sounds like the easier way to go. But I think when you look at it, and again, we can have the discussions later off, it's much more painful, much longer to do, and usually much more costly to do. But to develop the best long-term, cost-effective alternative, hopefully we can build Norfolk a school that the town will be proud of, that the kids deserve, and that will last you for the next 50-plus years. Secure state funding. Right now, the state funding that we will be reimbursed, the town will be reimbursed, is over 50%. We continue to look at as many green options as we can because they keep bumping up the reimbursement the more we can do that. And the town approval, this will come before town approval next October. Last slide, please. Why now? I'll begin. As I mentioned, we have overcrowding and code issues that really should be addressed as soon as possible. If you haven't been into the Freeman Centennial School, when I first walked into it, it was sort of deja vu when I first started teaching back in the early 70s, because it was all open classrooms, which really the way kids learn is very, very difficult. I offered to put up walls right away, just false walls, so that we could separate them, but right now they do it with whatever they have that can stand between the two rooms. But those are some of the issues. We want to avoid the costly repairs and replacements, which would fall on the town's shoulders 100%. The state lifted the 3-year moratorium on funding school. Construction costs right now, because of the economic climate we're in, are coming in well below the bids. So even though the school is a few years down the road, if we can secure bids now, we'll get them at a very, very solid rate. Norfolk is at the front of the line for assistance, and the point I want to get across to the town, if this doesn't pass, what will happen is you'll be bumped to the end of the line, and again, going through this process with a previous district, there are hundreds of schools on that list. You won't be eligible to receive state funding, I can almost guarantee you, for at least 10 to 15 years.
Thank you, Mr. Leclerc.
Thank you very much. I'm all set. Any questions you have?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Article 85. Thank you, Mr. Leclerc. Article 85. Any further business on Article 85? Returning back now to Mr. Rosenberg
Moderator,
on Article 85.
Right. I have questions to two town groups. One I think is to the treasurer-collector. And at past town meetings, I've mentioned that if you try to pay bills online, that is the e-government electronic bill paying thing, right now you can only use Internet Explorer as the only accepted browser, and that's a problem for people who can't use Internet Explorer for various reasons. I spoke to the people at the bank that Norfolk uses, and they said they have a program to use other, to support additional browsers, and that other towns are already using that all towns will eventually be forced to use it. But my question is, can Norfolk join that program now so that we can start using browsers other than Internet Explorer for paying bills as soon as possible?
Thank you. Mr. Hathaway, Town Administrator.
We've looked into that since our last IT director left, but we'd be happy. At that point, it wasn't viable. We'd be happy to look at it again, and I'll give you a call.
Yeah.
Feel free to call me.
Let me personally volunteer to help with that if you want. The other issue I have is with DPW. Yesterday I spoke to Mr. Vito and asked whether the monthly water samples could be posted on the web, and he said at that time he'd look into it. I don't know if he's had time since that was just yesterday, but if you have an update about the possibility of posting the monthly sample information, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Okay, any further discussions on Article 85? We're returning back now to Article 66. Ms. Elder, Advisory Board.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 66 as written in the warrant.
Thank you, Ms. Elder, for the Advisory Board's recommendations.
The Board of Selectmen and the Personnel Board have jointly recommended the abolition of the Personnel Board. The board was originally established to assure equity in compensation and employment conditions across all groups of town employees. However, most of town employees are now covered by union or management contracts and are not governed by the personnel bylaws. Personnel Board authority applies to fewer than 25 employees, including 5 department heads and a number of part-time staff. The boards believe that the town would be better served by a professional human resources director who could work to assure fair and equitable treatment across all groups. And in the absence of a director, the Personnel Board has recommended that its responsibilities be handled by the Board of Selectmen for the town administrator, and that the town administrator assume this function for all other affected employees.
Thank you, Ms. Elder. Any further discussion or debate on Article 66? Mr. Bragdon, to the green microphone, please.
Hi, my name's Scott Bragdon. I live in Frederickson Road, and I'm on the Personnel Board. I fully agree with all of the comments that were just made. I also want to point out a couple of things. One, that the Personnel Board does believe that the town is at a size that they're going to need some professional human resource support. Recognize there's no money for that now, but something to be considered in the future. And with the size now of around 20 employees covered by the board, it no longer really makes sense that it be managed in the way that it is today. And then lastly, I want to make sure that you know that that I'm in receipt of a letter from virtually every one of the employees that signed by every one of the employees that is covered by this board, saying that they agree with this article. So, you know, the employees that are covered are in full agreement with abolishment of this committee and the movement of the responsibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. Anybody wish to speak at the red microphone against Article 66? Mr. Boucher.
Bob Boucher, 3 Fleetwood Drive. As a past member of the Personnel Board on 2 occasions, I strongly oppose this. The last time I was on the board, the members of the Personnel Board agreed that because of the number of contracts there were, that it made sense to hire a human resource person to conduct the business of this board. When we did that, we even got the position graded. Town meeting passed it. It was never funded. In these economic times, we're not funding a human resource person this year. We probably won't do it next year. The town administrator, I'm sure, has maybe 5 or 10 seconds a week he could devote to personnel issues above and beyond what he already does. I don't believe this should be placed in the hands of the Board of Selectmen. They have a lot of things to do. I was surprised to hear that all the members that would be all the employees that would be covered under this are in agreement with it, because I see potential problems without a human resource person, with possible grievances, etc. So I strongly urge people to vote against the abolition of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Boucher. At the green microphone, Mr. Bragdon, for the second time.
Yeah, just in response to that, to make it clear, the Personnel Board has not been functioning as a human resource board or human resource group. There have been support of a small group of employees, and would only hear grievances on for that small part of the population. The grievances and the grievance procedures and all of the contracts that cover all of the rest of the employees do not go through the Personnel Board. They go up through the supervisor or manager, the town administrator, and up to the selectmen anyway. So.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. Anybody else wish to speak against Article 66? Anybody else wish to speak in favor of Article 66? It is a bylaw amendment. It requires a majority vote. If you vote yes, you're voting to abolish the Personnel Board and transfer those duties to a Human Resources Director if we have one, and in the absence of a Human Resources Director, the Town Administrator. If you vote no, you're voting to keep the Personnel Board in effect as it currently exists under town bylaws. All in favor of Article 66, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. It is a majority vote. I will count it at the standing request of any 6 voters. I do want to acknowledge the moderator is the appointing authority of the Personnel Board, and we've had 5 people serving as volunteers, supervising about 20 people, and I know they've spent long hours doing that, and as the appointing authority, I want to thank all of the now abolished members of the Personnel Board for your work. Thank you. Article 67, Ms. Elder, Advisory Board.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 67 as written in the warrant.
Thank you. Ms. Elder, with the recommendation of the Advisory Board?
Yes, this proposes the consolidation of the warrant and advisory committee recommendations and will save the town money by eliminating a second mailing.
Thank you. Any further arguments by the Bylaw Committee in support of Article 67 beyond what's already been stated? Thank you. Anything against? Mr. Boucher at the red microphone.
Yes, I would ask that, actually, what I want to do is propose an amendment to this. In Section 5, or between Section 2 and Section 5, it was stated, and further, to amend the Norfolk bylaw Article 1, Section 5 warrant for the town meeting by deleting the last sentence so that the section will now read. I consider it important to let the town know what this last sentence was. Furthermore, a copy of the warrant for all town meetings shall be delivered to each residence no less than 7 days or 14 days in the case of a special town meeting before the day appointed for the same. In other words, and I appreciate what the advisory board does, but their composite may get to our house the Saturday before town meeting, the Monday before town meeting, and unless you've gone to one of the places where the warrant is posted, you don't know what's on the warrant. So I would like to propose the following amendment. To amend Article 1, Section 5 by adding a new last line. Furthermore, copies of the warrants for all town meetings shall be available at Town Hall and the Norfolk Public Library, and a copy of the warrant shall be posted on the town's website. Each of these will occur not less than 7 days or 14 days in the case of a special town meeting before the day appointed for the same.
Thank you. There's a motion made and seconded to amend Article 67. Thank you. Mr. Boucher, in support of the amendment, do you wish to be heard?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. As many of you can gather, I'm one of these junkies for town meeting. I like to know what is being proposed. I like to know far enough in advance so that I can do some homework and, make up my mind. So that's the purpose of the amendment, to get us some information at least 7 days prior to an annual town meeting or 14 days before. And again, this is not a knock on the advisory board. They do their darndest to get us these recommendations out as fast as they can. But if we tie the warrant and their recommendations together, we may not get it until just before a meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Boucher. Mr. Boucher, if you just approach for a moment. Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak in opposition to the motion to amend? Mr. Sterling, with great hesitation.
Mr. Moderator, even now I'm confused about which microphone to go to. It is difficult. The advisory board has to prepare a warrant, so it is out. I guess my observation, and perhaps this should be made in the center, if you'll forgive, I'll stay here. My observation is...
Get a little closer to the mic, Arlie.
Thank you. My observation, Mr. Moderator, is that putting a definitive schedule at the tail end of a lengthy process is, I believe, self-defeating. One must put a schedule or agree on a process which has milestones leading up to the town meeting so that there is adequate time to prepare the warrant and to think through all the bits and pieces that go into it. I'm all in favor of getting the information out, and God bless people actually read what we write. But I think an even more valuable suggestion, if I may, is to have perhaps an agreement, a procedural agreement that lay out a timeline for submissions of articles and motions in a fashion that would facilitate the discussion even more than what we do now. Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. At the green microphone in support of the amendment, Mr. Rosenberg.
Right. I think I agree with everything that Mr. Sterling just said. I wanted to point out that there already is a deadline at the end of the process, namely it's the town meeting. And since that is fixed, then one can work back from it. I think the town meeting becomes meaningless if people show up and have no idea what's going to be discussed. I mean, the reason that warrants exist is to warn people about what will be discussed, and it has to be done in a timely way, otherwise it's meaningless. So I think that while there are a number of ways to accomplish this, this amendment is a reasonable way to both save the money that the advisory board wants to save, a good thing, and also to let people know why they're coming to a town meeting and prepare to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. At the red microphone, Ms. Nelson, Chair of the Bylaw Committee.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Just want to say that the Bylaw Committee was the committee that drafted this for the last town meeting that was canceled, and the reason that it was drafted this way was because currently the way it's written is that the town is forced to send out the warrant, the plain warrant, if you will, and the advisory board, with their recommendation, is not required to do that. So 2 warrants are being mailed out at a significant cost. A lot of people wait for the advisory board warrant because they enjoy reading that and their recommendations. So trying to be green and save paper and save the town money, we thought maybe it would be more cost-effective to just have one mailing, but that doesn't say that warrants won't be available. So if someone in town, once the warrant is posted that it's available, wants a warrant, they can simply call, like Marion Harrington, and she will send out a warrant to your home, or one will be available at Town Hall. There won't be piles of them, I believe, available at the library or different places, because that would be very hard to maintain the piles and all that other kind of stuff. But they will be available, so, and they will be available as soon as they're printed. So just want to let you know that.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. At the green microphone, Mr. Smith.
As a former advisory board member and a member of the Board of Selectmen, I've been on both sides of this controversy about how you get the information out to everybody, how you work the process. When I was on the advisory board, I was always upset how slow things went, how warrants kept getting opened and closed, and we couldn't get our recommendations out in a timely manner. Then as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I did exactly the stuff that I didn't like when I was on the advisory board. But in terms of the amendment that's been presented, this amendment does not mean there's going to be 2 mailings. All this amendment, if I understand it correctly, is that there will be something out there, at least online and at a couple of other places, so you can see what the warrant will be. I pretty much think that in the future, as it's been lately, you're probably not going to get written advisory board recommendations until probably within 3 or 4 days of the town meeting. But it would be nice for us junkies who are here tonight, who are the ones that really care about what's going on in Norfolk, we would like to have at least a couple of weeks to sort of get an idea of what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Does anybody else wish to speak at the red microphone against the amendment? At the green microphone, Ms. Kevorkian.
Marguerite Kevorkian, Berkner, Wampanoag. I'm a firm believer that you can never communicate enough. And with that communication comes timeliness. And oftentimes we miss the component of timeliness. There are people in town who don't even know we have a town meeting tonight or we had a town meeting last night. They don't all read the Boomerang. They don't all have internet, especially our elders. And so I think we have to look at different venues in terms of how to deliver the information. There are towns that have the scouts deliver the warrant. Excuse me?
No, please don't interrupt the speaker.
Thank you. So my suggestion is I agree with the amendment, and I think that we just need to look at different venues. I appreciate the time that the advisory board puts into establishing their recommendations, and I too look forward to getting the recommendations and knowing what it is that we're going to be addressing and how to prepare. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kevorkian. At the red microphone, Mr.
Name's Tarasi.
almost 11.
Lest we forget. This is more a comment than it is, being negative. I'd never be negative anyway, you know that. But the comment is that some of you may or may not know that I spend a lot of time in other towns dealing, more or less dabbling, I should say, with their politics too. Just a couple of years ago, I was up in Stoneham. I was called into Stoneham. They were trying to defeat an override. The problem we ran into was that for the first time I realized that some towns don't send out warrants. And the situation in Stoneham was that they posted warrants at various public places. I guess it was the post office, the town hall, and all of this. Half the people that I spoke with in town and trying to rally a group around us had no idea what was going on in town because either they weren't aware of or had no way to get to where these warrants were posted. So again, it's indifferent to me because I'm computer illiterate. It doesn't matter how I get mine, and I can always find Ali Sterling someplace and get his comments firsthand. But at any rate, just think about that before you vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion at the green microphone? Further discussion at the red microphone? Mr. Boucher, for the second time on this motion.
And then I'm out, huh? I thought you got 3 strikes.
Two strikes in here.
Only 2 strikes. Yes.
I just want to, Mr. Boucher, I just want to acknowledge that the town administrator has posted your proposed amendment on the screen for everybody to see. Thank you for that.
As another speaker pointed out, this does not necessitate 2 mailings. The whole purpose of the advisory board's recommendation to eliminate that is still here, intact. This just changed the line they left out of the second piece of this that we didn't get any information 7 to 14 days before a meeting. I consider it important to know whether, the reason that there are 2 things here is that originally I just wanted it on the town's website, and my wife pointed out that everybody doesn't have internet and so on. Right now, this is being posted, as another speaker said, by the constable in 4 or 5 different places. The warrant is available. Give it to the people.
Thank you, Mr. Boucher. Any further discussion at the red microphone? Any further discussion at the green microphone? Mr. Sneed, in support of the amendment.
Pat Sneed, Frederickson Road, member of the advisory committee. This was actually a debate that took place within the advisory committee as to whether or not we should impose the same time limit upon ourselves that existed prior to this. The concern, which you've heard expressed, is that we are getting stuff at the last minute. We're voting on things at the last minute, never mind having our recommendations ready. Nevertheless, a solution was proposed that we impose a time limit on ourselves and that we go with whatever we have, and if it's incomplete, so be it. This doesn't even require mailing, it just requires posting to the website. I believe it's not an unreasonable request that we have stuff, whatever state it may be in, at as of a certain time, 7 days prior. So I think this is a reasonable request on the part of the town.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed. Any further discussion with respect to the amendment? The amendment before town meeting has been posted on the board. If you vote yes, you're voting to amend the main motion by adding this language at the end of Section 5 as printed in the warrant. If you vote no, you're voting to keep the warrant article as printed in the warrant, and then we'll go back and continue the debate on Article 67 as printed. Requires a majority vote. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a unanimous vote. Article 67 is now amended to incorporate the additional language as after the last sentence of Section 5. With that amendment, is there any further discussion, pro or con, on Article 67? It is a bylaw amendment, requires a majority vote. If you vote yes, you're voting to amend the bylaws as indicated in the warrant with the amendment. If you vote no, you're voting to keep the bylaws as they are already. Mr. Rosenberg at the question microphone.
Yes. assuming this passes, would there be anything to prevent the moderator or Board of Selectmen to open the web posting up for comments so that citizens could look at the warrant and either ask additional questions or have some discussion on the website about the items in the warrant?
Thank you. Just by way of clarification, I think it's a great idea, Mr. Rosenberg. To the extent that I can control the moderator's homepage, I'll invite comments to be posted. Article 67 is amended as noted on the screen. You vote yes, you're voting to adopt the bylaw change. Ms. Elder, do you wish to speak to this?
I'm sorry,
You're voting no, you wish to keep the bylaws as they are. All in favor of Article 67, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? It is a majority vote. I will count it at the standing request of any 7 voters. Article 68 was a consent calendar matter that was held. Ms. Elder.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 68 as written in the warrant.
Thank you. Would the, is there a second? Ms. Elder, in support of Article 68.
This change addresses the town's responsibility relative to trench safety as mandated by a new state law.
Thank you. Any, would the voter who wished to have a hold on this from the consent calendar wish to speak on this at the debate? Mr. Bekanowski.
In the interest of time, I should be over there, but I'll make this quick. I'd just like to make one proposed amendment to this, is just remove the word reasonable from the last sentence.
Thank you. The bylaw committee, would you accept the deletion of the word reasonable in the last line as a friendly amendment? Yes, the word reasonable will be stricken by agreement as redundant. The amendment is adopted by agreement of the proponent. The Article 68 as it now stands reads as printed in the warrant without the word reasonable before regulations, just the word regulations. Any further discussion on Article 68? Mr. Rosenberg at the question microphone.
Right. In introducing this, the statement was made that this is required by virtue of a new state law. Could somebody explain that state law and what it requires?
Thank you. Ms. Nelson at the green microphone for the bylaw committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. On December 4th, 2002, the legislature enacted new legislation, sorry about this, relative to excavation and trench safety. The legislation, known as Jackie's Law, was in response to a tragic accident that occurred in 1999 when a 4-year-old girl was killed when a trench she had climbed into collapsed on her. The Division of Occupational Safety and Department of Public Safety together are charged with administering Jackie's Law, including all the regulations. These regulations went into effect January 1st, 2009.
Thank you. Any further discussion or debate with respect to Article 68 is amended? It's a bylaw change, requires a majority vote. If you vote yes, you're voting in favor of changing the bylaw as printed in the warrant, except for the word reasonable being deleted. If you vote no, you're voting to keep the bylaws as they currently exist. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a unanimous vote. We have 5 minutes remaining. Before we get into substantive articles, on the moderator's own motion, I just want to go forward. There were 4 consent calendar items that were held on a voter's request. I want to jump forward to those. If there's no debate, perhaps we can dispatch with them in the next 5 minutes. Article 80 was to allow the town to accept grants. There was an objection to having that heard on the consent calendar. Does anybody wish now to have a debate on Article 80 to allow the town selectmen to accept grants? In that case, we'll bundle these, Mr. Sterling, as a single motion in a moment. On Article 81 is to allow the DPW to accept grants. Does anybody wish to have a debate about whether the DPW should be allowed to accept grants? Article 82 is to allow the selectmen to sell property for tax title purposes. Does anybody object to that now and wish to have a debate about Article 82? And the last that I'll advance is Article 84, to sell surplus property. Does anybody at this time wish to have any debate about Article 84? Mr. Sterling, I'll accept a motion to approve Articles 80, 81, 82, and 84 as a single motion.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Articles 80, 81, 82, and 84 as a single motion.
Thank you. Is there a second? There's a second. Is there any further discussion or debate? Grouping all of those articles as a single vote. Requires a majority vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is unanimously adopted as a vote of town meeting. We're almost to the witching hour. We can continue on. Mr. Lehan,
Mr. Moderator,
you have the floor.
I move to adjourn town meeting till June 16th at 7 p.m.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you. It requires a majority vote. The motion before town meeting is to adjourn this town meeting to June 16 at this location, the KP Junior High School Auditorium at 7 p.m. Any further discussion, debate? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Town meeting is adjourned.